I didn't think we would get here, but we're here. We've reached the Micah Parsons portion drama of the offseason, and I'm frustrated by it. But tonight, we'll break down what I'm talking about. We'll break down if we should be concerned at all about it or what should we make out of it. Let's get to it. Here we go. What is up, everyone, and welcome into A to Z Sports Dallas Primetime. I am your host, Mauricio Rodriguez, streaming with you live every Sunday through Thursday night at 8 p.m. Central here on Dallas On Demand Sports Talk Network. With a lot more content coming your way, make sure that you check out atozsports.com/Dallas. And as always, do me a favor and hit the like button for me if you enjoy the show. Welcome, everyone, on a Wednesday night. It is a great night to talk some Cowboys football and also a little bit of a dramatic night. And man, oh man, listen, this is kind of a weird spot that we are in here on A to Z Sports Dallas Primetime and just Cowboys Nation in general. Here's what I mean. We've had, oh man, a portion of the offseason where we've seen all of the Dak Prescott debate take place. Should he be extended? Should he not be extended? What should the Cowboys do? Are they mishandling things? We talked about Tyron Smith on a similar light as well. Should the Cowboys bring him back? Should they not do it? And then he got signed by the Jets, and we fought about it. We did the same with Tony Pollard. We're doing the same with CeeDee Lamb in his extension a little bit. And I think that one is a little bit friendlier because I feel like the vast majority of Cowboys Nation is on board signing CeeDee Lamb to a long-term deal. But the guy that I never thought we would get to a spot where we are having an actual debate about whether or not the Cowboys should or will re-sign him is Micah Parsons. But we're here in the middle of, not in the middle of, but late March 27th. And that is a discussion of the day. And if you're wondering, how did we get here in the first place? That's because of some comments, interesting comments made by insider Jory Epstein on the Yahoo Fantasy Football Show, where she broke down the state of the Cowboys. And she did a great job taking us behind the scenes and talking about what the Jerry Jones is thinking, what the Joneses thinking might be in this whole situation, what the front office is thinking, the whole discourse around these players on the inside. There's a particular note that really raised some debate, and it's her thoughts through her sources on Micah Parsons. And I want us to hear to what she had to say together, and then, as we do on Primetime, discourse it, break it down, and share our opinions. Before we get to the video, though, let me say hi very quickly. We've got Gregory, Mark Aaron, Katharina on the show. We've also got Isidro. We've got Theryl Burns, Mark Aaron. Oh, I might have messed up the scheduling settings. Damn. Mark Aaron says, thought you were on at 9. And then Gregory saying, weren't you supposed to be on until 10? I don't know what happened here. I don't know if it was me or if it was... Or if it was like the website, because we've got different, time zones here on the show. So I'm sorry if I misscheduled it. We were always live at 8 p.m. Central for the most part. So I'm sorry about that if that happened. But hey, we are here. We are live. We are live every Sunday through Thursday night at 8 p.m. Central. So sorry if I misscheduled things on the YouTube side of things. But either way, I appreciate you being here. Do me a favor, and by the way, hit the like button for me if you enjoyed the show. So now, let's get to what Jory Epstein had to say about Micah Parsons. I'll play you the clip, and I'll be back to talk about it with you. Here we go.
Mike is an interesting one because I think that I was talking to a defensive coach from another team about this, and I was just trying to understand because, on one hand, we see Micah's sack numbers, we see what he can do, but it's like, think about the biggest games that they had, the games against San Francisco, the playoff games. What did Micah do in those games? And I had one coach tell me when the Cowboys are winning, Micah's a Hall of Fame player. When the Cowboys need him most, he's pretty average. And I was asking, I'm like, okay, well, if he's taking off some plays, like people say Chris Jones takes off plays, like I still think he's worth the money. I still think he's helped the Chiefs to Super Bowls. And this coach, I think, wisely told me, Chris Jones takes off some plays, but he makes them when they matter most. Yeah. Micah is not 100% on all plays, but he kind of makes them when they matter least. And I'm not saying least, but he's not making them when they matter most. So I would say, like, you have to decide.
That sounds like the whole Cowboys team. That sounds like the entire.
I know. When I told this to someone in the front office, they started naming some other people on that roster. And I think there's something like culturally. So it's interesting. But all of this is to say, you kind of have like a split in the Cowboys front office. I definitely have people telling me in that front office, like, we believe in Dak. He's a great quarterback. He's the glue of this roster, the glue of the locker room. And no matter what coach we think we'll bring in, we believe they'll want to work with Dak. And you have other people who say, like, well, if we haven't gotten over the hump now, how are we ever going to get over it? And if we can't get over it with him, like, what do we do?
Ooh, wait, there's just a lot to unpack out of that whole thing. And by the way, the whole segment is about 5 minutes long or longer. If you want to check it out, I do recommend checking it out because for the most part, I agreed with just about everything that she had to say other than the Micah thing. Now, Jory is an awesome insider, and I really respect her work. She is a badass in what she does, and I'm very, very, I really love her content. I will say that I'm really intrigued about who's this person telling her that about Micah, because the whole framing of it is an opposing NFL coach. And if that is the case, I believe her because, again, I do love Jory's reporting. It's always been on point, and she has that credibility for sure. But I also kind of see why a lot of people in Cowboys Nation are like, oh, this is the negotiating media smear campaign, And I'm not saying that Jory is kind of like buying into that smear campaign at all. This is not what I'm suggesting. But could it be maybe that one of her sources kind of like is a little bit on that conspiracy, involved? Yeah, like I don't think it's crazy to think about it, just knowing the way that the Joneses do business, right? Where they like to get the media involved in their negotiating process. But I just don't agree with the take about Micah. I think the data and the film also does not agree with it. I understand looking at production from Micah in those big games and being like, hey, it's not the same production. So what's up? But I think there's no real reason to believe that this is Micah just being bad in big stage moments. Because one, we've seen him close out games. We've seen him take over games and dictate the action. That is why we view him as such a great player and such a player that is on a trajectory on path to Canton, Ohio in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, even 3 years into his career. However, when you look at the production numbers, there's a story there to follow, right? He hasn't had the sacks in the Packers game, in the 49ers game, like she mentions. But also, let's take the context into account. What have we seen in those kind of ball games? We've seen, first and foremost, Matt LaFleur and Kyle Shanahan. I'll use those two examples. Masterful offensive play callers just throw everything at him. And I'm talking runs away from number 11. I'm talking motion blocks right into 11's face. And even if you like the split zone type of block that is going against the flow of the play, a lot of play action and rolling out away from Micah. But there's also the double teaming. In the case of the Packers game, there were a lot of examples of the Packers placing a sniffer, like a player behind the offensive line that went right at Micah, or the running back being protection right at Micah instead of like picking up blitzes across the board. They were going straight into number 11 to take him out of the game. And they were masterful in it, and they should be, praised for it from an objective point of view. What did we also see in that game? A 27-0 scoreboard in the first half, which ultimately leads to a game that is not close, and a game in which the Packers can just do their thing and run the football, and which basically takes that pass rush element away from the Cowboys defense, not just Micah. And the same goes for the 49ers game. It was a blowout. It got ugly pretty quickly. And that just takes you away from it. But if you're putting that much effort as an offense into sending everything the way of a specific pass rusher, that in itself is making an impact in the game, because that means there's other one-on-ones across the board that you can exploit. Now, if you do or you don't, that's a whole other story. But it doesn't necessarily mean that Micah is playing at a worse level if I'm tossing him, double teams and triple teams and doing all that. Not to mention that Jordan Love had his 6th lowest time to throw on average of the season versus the Cowboys per Pro Football Focus. So that's also the game plan of just having so much quick game involved, so much one-step passing attacks, that kind of stuff that really just adds to the conversation, and it becomes a very different, discussion that we should be having. I don't think we've seen any sort of evidence about Micah being worse in big-time games. I think it's just true that when the Cowboys have had such horrible losses, it's been in large part because Micah is a little bit neutralized with all of those tactics that I just talked about, but not necessarily because Micah, quote unquote, does not show up. And I understand if some people are like, well, even with the double teams, if you want to be a great one, you've got to succeed. That is true up to a point. But there are exceptions when you are talking about the most double-teamed player in the NFL per ESPN, even more than Myles Garrett. Not by a wide margin, but even more than Myles Garrett. But between those two and the rest of the league, then the margin gets much larger. We're talking about guys that are always double-teamed. And I just think it's just impressive that an NFL coach would go out there and say that, hey, he doesn't show up in the big game, so the Cowboys should question if they should extend him or not. It's just crazy to me because we see the production numbers, we see the film. Micah still makes an impact in those games. So much so that even with quarterbacks just throwing the ball quicker, versus the Cowboys, Micah is still getting those pressures in. And that is a thing, by the way. We've seen teams adjust their passing games to Micah's mere presence on the field, which is actually one of the biggest arguments that we've had here on Primetime when we get into the whole off-ball linebacker versus edge rusher discussions that we've gotten so used to. We're always talking about like, hey, but Micah's presence alone on the line is an impactful thing that changes the game. So, man, I'm just upset, a little bit upset that we've gotten to this point where we're like questioning if the Cowboys should extend Micah Parsons. I think sometimes we can lose sight of how rare players like Micah are, and I wish that wasn't the case. But it's been such a wild offseason that this is where we are at. Like, some members of the fan base are legitimately so frustrated that they're buying into the idea that the Cowboys should not pay Micah because he is somebody that doesn't show up in the big games. It's just so wild to me that this is where we are at, that people are actually believing it out of the frustration that this franchise has basically instilled on them after 3 decades of waiting. And not only that, but a lack of vision for the future where we're like, I just don't know what they're betting on at this point. It's crazy. It's where we're at right now. And I do think it's a little bit suspicious to look at this and be like, man, isn't that good timing for the Cowboys and Micah Parsons to have that sort of narrative be pushed out into the national audience? I mean, I'll say this too, like, it's the Yahoo Fantasy Football show. It's a great show. It's great content, but it's not like it's, ESPN First Take or something like that. So we might be pushing it a little bit with the conspiracy theories, but also this is kind of like the way things go when you're talking about the Cowboys front office and their way of doing things. And we've seen it with Dak Prescott. We've seen it with Dak to the point where Sure, they'll say that they believe in him and that they want to win a Super Bowl with him. But then there's also like that cryptic message from Jerry Jones where he was like, yeah, we'll go as far as Dak take us. And so far, it's been the divisional round. And then everyone is like, well, what does that even mean? Or Stephen Jones saying that, hey, this was actually Jerry saying like, hey, we don't need to get a deal done in 2024. Instead of simply going out there and being a regular general manager who would just say, yeah, we're working on it, right? We're working on it together and we'll try to take care of it and just not give away any other info. No, Jerry wants you to know they don't need to extend Dak Prescott if they don't want to. And man, to some point, I do think that has an impact in the way that the players perceive the team and the decisions that they make in accordance to it. There was this tweet, and shout out Connor Lipsey from Blog and the Boys, who does a great job covering the Cowboys. And obviously he's also very involved in like draft coverage. And man, he does a great job. He had this tweet out, which was liked by, and I'm trying to find it for you. I'm going to have to read it to you. But man, Connor went out and put this out there on the internet. He tweeted out, and I quote, "The Rams won the Super Bowl 2 years ago, and I was told the entire time that they would set their franchise back decades with how all in they went. Amazing how good front offices and coaching staffs figure it all out." And this was in response to Tre'Davious White being signed by the LA Rams. Gilly hit the like button on that tweet. I think that's kind of like an interesting tweet, man, to hit a like button if you're Stephon Gilmore and you know Connor covers the Cowboys. And I mean, he probably did know, in my opinion, or probably understood what the context of it was. And there's been some whispers about like a lot of those sort of likes being around social media from players that might not be too happy with the way the Cowboys are doing things. And I'm kind of like intrigued about how does that play out inside a locker room when players are looking at what the front office is doing and they're thinking and maybe even talking about it. And they're like, I don't know about that. I don't know if this is good, if this franchise has a plan or not. It's something that it's just fair to point out as a concern. Now, I'm going to read some of the Micah-related comments before I get to the other part of what Jory says on that video that we just saw. Because, man, this is even more important. Man, it's just crazy. Where does Jory work now? I don't think she's in Dallas anymore, says Mark Aaron. Jory's working with Yahoo. She's covering the NFL at a national level. Obviously, she's always going to be very tied into Dallas because that's where she had a very important step in his career. So, Mark, yeah, you're right. She's covering the NFL nationally now. So you're definitely right with that. Now, let's see here some of your comments here. Gregory says, Micah wants to be a champion, and he sees the history of the Cowboys the last 30 years, and it scares him. Cam says, nobody listens to Micah. That's why he does what he does, says Cam, and I'm not sure that I disagree with that. Like, I'm with Cam on that. Manny says, Micah needs to shut up and do his trash talking on the field. Needs to adjust to what teams are doing to him, says Manny. And man, like I'll say this though, like we've consistently seen Micah beat double teams as well. It's not like Micah has not been productive anymore. You know, sure, the Packers did neutralize him, but man, they had to throw everything his way. Sure, we could be like, well, Micah should be a superhero and beat it all out. What I think should actually be happening is the Cowboys should be figuring out what that is doing. The defensive coordinator, the teammates, and be like, man, this is what we will do for when they treat Micah this way. This is what D-Law will be doing on a one-on-one. This is what the defensive tackles will be doing on one-on-ones. And really just exploit the fact that the offensive resources are so heavily invested into stopping one man and one man only. And there's the film. The film is there. You can go watch it. It's not like they're blocking Micah just with some simple stuff. Now, that doesn't mean that the Packers did not have some good blocking reps when they got the best of him one-on-one. There were a couple of those. There was that sack of Tom just anchoring versus Micah's bull rush and not giving him a chance to do anything else. But the reality is, for the most part, they're just doing everything they can to stop Micah. And as a defense, you got to figure how to use that to your advantage. Travis Power says it's just what happens, Mo. The fans think we shouldn't pay Micah, are just sucked into the media that pushes these narratives because it gets clicks from the people that hate the Cowboys. That might be true as well. Let's see here. Not much Micah can do when they are double teaming and chipping him, says Jersey. Exactly, man. Like, you got to realize that, hey, there's a limit. There's absolutely a limit to what you can do if you're getting the kind of treatment that Micah is getting. You got to figure out ways of how can I get him isolated on one-on-one situations consistently, which I think Dan Quinn did pretty well for the most part for the 3 years that he was here in Dallas. Like, for the most part, we praised Dan Quinn for those pressure designs that got Micah isolated versus the one left guard or the one right guard who was the weakness of the opposing offensive team. How many times did we see that? And how many times did we break down all of the pressure designs that had Donovan Wilson stepping up to the line of scrimmage, which forced the center to, just respect him and honor him, or Leighton Vander Esch also threatening the A-gap, even though we know he's never going to be a efficient pass rusher in that way. Like, Dan Quinn had all those sorts of looks dialed up week after week after week. But then versus the Packers, you look at what they did, and there wasn't anything that special about it. They had Micah dropping on 3rd and long. And you're like, what's the real problem here? And I don't think it's Micah's play. I don't think it's that at all. Melvin says Micah does his job. There are 11 players on defense. The others need to step up. Cannot rely on one player all the time, which I agree with. Right? Let's see here. Ezekiel says, scary to see players get paid because they usually drop in production. First and foremost, I don't think that's true always. Like Myles Garrett is paid. Aaron Donald was paid. I think this is a narrative that exists among fans where they're like, once you pay players, they just stop producing at an elite level. And there's definitely cases of that. Like, for example, Ezekiel Elliott on the Cowboys was an example of that. But then there's a lot of other examples that are not at all that, at a quarterback, at other important positions. And I just mentioned a few of them. What about Aaron Donald? What about Chris Jones, who got paid again, but he was already paid quite a good bunch of money. And a lot of players that we can look at that are one of the top paid players in the league that are still just absolute badasses in what they do. Do we not think that Tyreek Hill is good anymore? Do we not think that Cooper Kupp is good anymore? A.J. Brown, Debo, all of those guys. I'm just looking at the wide receiver contracts right now just to further this example. Some of the edge rushers, man. There's Nick Bosa. There's Brian Burns, who just got paid like recently, so maybe that doesn't count. T.J. Watt, Myles Garrett, Montez Sweat. These are all players that just absolutely destroy that narrative. And there's many more, but I'm not going to spend, another 10 minutes going through different examples. Now, besides the Micah Parsons stuff from that Jerry Epstein video, man, speaking of a lot to unpack here, what she says at the end got me like, whoa. So she's saying that she talked to other people in the front office and mentioned how it wasn't maybe a Micah thing, but it was an entire team thing about players not showing up for the big games. And she said, I mentioned this to somebody in the front office, and then other names were mentioned. Man, what is that? What is all that about? Just like the front office singling out players that are not showing up for the big games. We can agree that's kind of like weird behavior from an NFL team that is basically, just trying to get the right recipe together to go all the way and not stop in the divisional round. And then she also adds that there's a divide in the front office between what they should do with Dak Prescott. And at other point of the interview, she also mentions there's some frustration about the way that they're handling the Dak Prescott thing. There's just so many red flags, aren't there, this offseason? And I've said this from the beginning. When the Cowboys were idle on the first few days of free agency, and people were like, man, they do this every year. Why are you guys surprised? Yes, I agree. They never go for the splashes in free agency. They never go for the big names. They never sign the humongous contracts that are talked about on talk shows for the first week of free agency. This year has been different. This year has not been the same. And I think we all know that. This year has been different to others, where last year you got the trades for Stephon Gilmore, you got the trades for Brandon Cooks. You re-signed some of your key players, which did usually, at least, where they in another year they would have kept Tyron Smith. They would have worked something out. They would have kept Stephon Gilmore, maybe not, because he was an outside guy, so maybe that was different. But maybe they would have kept Tyler Viadic as well, or they would have kept this and that other player. Maybe they would have kept Jonathan Hankins, who wasn't really that expensive. This feels different. Even the Dak Prescott thing is different, where the last time that we talked about that deal and we were just seeing what was going to happen with it, they could franchise tag him. There was some level of control there, and they got the deal done before that final year, before that second tag year. They didn't allow Dak to play under the tag for a second straight year. They used it as a placeholder, then had an agreement in place. But this is actually, if they don't get a deal done, which again, I believe they will. We talked about this last night. But assuming they don't, that's the most dangerous game you can play. Because this is not the Cowboys being like, yeah, we don't want Dak. We're ready to move on. This is the Cowboys messing up the negotiation and not getting what they want. That's just the truth. This is them getting into a situation where they're like, oh, whoops, he didn't really sign with us. He really didn't do it. He's going to go to the free agency market. Oh, crap. That's what would happen if Dak doesn't stick around in Dallas for the long term. It's not going to be that the Cowboys coldly calculated things and decided that they were better off with Trey Lance. Nah, it's not that. We know it's not that. It's them losing out on negotiations. If that indeed happens, which again, I don't believe it will. Gregory says, Mo, do you think Micah will take over the defensive captain position? Yeah, I think so. Or I don't know if you mean like I would assume you mean like an extra official one where you're like, because Mike McCarthy likes to do the wiggly rotating captains thing. And I don't think you mean the green dot communicating stuff, Gregory, which I don't see Micah being a candidate for. But yeah, like this non-official captain, yeah, I do think he kind of already has that role, if you will, just based on the kind of player that he is, where he's talking to players about mindset and he's talking to players about mentality. And we know he does because we've heard him talk about it and we've heard other players talk about like where Micah's head is at, and him talking to players about making sacrifices to go all the way and what it takes to win the Super Bowl and that kind of stuff. Shout out to Melvin, who says too many red flags. It really seems like Jerry is sabotaging the season or just doesn't care about winning. Too much drama now. I'm with the Texans now until Jerry's gone. Holy smokes. We had a Cowboys fan just quit on the team just now. But all kidding aside, like there's definitely been so much drama in this offseason. And I just watched that clip from Jory, and I was like, man, I can't believe this is where we're at. And that's why I wanted to bring it up on tonight's show. Like, I actually had a different show planned for you guys, but I watched it this morning, and I was like, man, we need to talk about this on prime time because it's getting – it might be like that final drop on like us feeling so weird about this offseason. It's so weird right now. And everyone feels this way. Like I haven't seen anyone be like, oh, the Cowboys are actually just nailing this offseason despite what people think, which we usually have. Like that's the regular ecosystem of Cowboys Nation. And I would bet any other fan base where you've got content creators, and I don't think other teams have the kind of content creators that Cowboys fans have. I think Dallas is really a great market for content creators. Or the local media people. They're awesome in what they do for the most part. But man, like you usually have the guys that are super pessimistic, the guys that are super optimistic, and then a bunch of people that are somewhere in between. But I don't think that there's even an optimistic content creator out there who is like, yeah, they're nailing this. They're absolutely nailing this. Let's go. We re-signed Trent Sig. That's the move. That's a game-changing move that we needed. I don't think there's anyone on that boat. I don't think there is. Mitesh says, which line will regress more? Offensive line or defensive line? Both have holes now. And I agree with that, but I absolutely think it would be offensive line. Because on the defensive side of things, sure, I wish I could feel better about the nose tackle spot, but I've still got Micah, I've still got DeMarcus Lawrence, and I've still got Osa. So I would go with the offensive line, where I'm not sure who my left tackle is, and by extension, I'm not sure who's my left guard. Because the Cowboys right now, they're singing the tune of Tyler remaining at left guard. But that means nothing. That means nothing until the Cowboys make their pick at 24th overall. That's when we will know what Tyler Smith even is. Doesn't matter. Wherever they say today, doesn't really matter. And I mentioned this because Mike McCarthy recently said that that Tyler would remain at left guard for now. You also don't have a center. The right tackle sure might get better because he's getting healthier, but maybe also not. Like, we don't know for sure. So, yeah, offensive line would be my bet for sure. Travis Power says, you have to think 2 years ago, everyone thought the Texans were a joke as an organization because of what they were doing. And look at them now. Suggest maybe we're not seeing something. Yeah, do you remember that? When they traded Hopkins and all that, and we were like, the Texans suck. I mean, they obviously also hit on a QB, which is like a franchise-defining moment. They hit on their QB, so that's like a huge, huge difference. But yeah, man, that's where we're at right now. And trust me, if you watch this show and you're like, man, when did Mo get so pessimistic? Trust me, I'm not trying to get clicks. I'm not trying to get views. I'm not trying to do this or that. I just genuinely feel like this about the Cowboys offseason. And when we break it down like we do here on the show, that's kind of like the conclusion that we're reaching. Does that mean the Cowboys are going to be a losing team in 2024? No, I don't think they're that bad. Like, I don't think they're taking that sort of step back. They're still going to be a competitive team. They've got a shot of winning the NFC East. But ironically, I think the biggest reason why that is, it's because of the three guys that we're trying to wait out on an extension. It's because of Dak, Micah, and CeeDee, honestly, at this point, because CeeDee was awesome last year. And sure, was I frustrated by the way that the Packers game went? Hell yeah. But also, I still think he's a legit wide receiver, man. So, yeah. We'll see, man. We'll see how this progresses. We might feel differently about this whole thing after the NFL draft and maybe after, like, if they, for some reason, make some moves that we're not really expecting them to. But we'll see. We'll see. Either way, we'll still be here every single night to talk about our shared pain and our shared feelings about the Dallas Cowboys ahead of the 2024 NFL season. But tonight, that will be it for me here on the show. So thanks so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to A to Z Sports Dallas Primetime. And remember, we are live every Sunday through Thursday night. If you enjoyed the show, do me a favor, hit the like button for me. And I'll see you tomorrow, Thursday, 8 p.m. Central. Have fun and have a great rest of your Wednesday night. Bye-bye.